About a month ago, Aerosoft released one of the most anticipated aircraft for Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's the de Havilland Canada -6, the Twin Otter. I was lucky enough to get my hands on a preview copy. I did a number of videos on this and things were certainly looking promising. At the time of release, this aircraft was plagued with sound and other issues, much to my and many others' disappointment. To put it bluntly, it simply didn't reach the standards we'd expect from a company like Aerosoft. Since release, it's had 3 minor updates, so I feel now is the right time. Let's jump back in the cockpit and see if this aircraft can live up to expectations. Warm welcome to the Sim Hangar. My name's Mark. Thanks for watching and let's get started. To put the Twin Otter through its paces today, we're going to be taking a short flight. We're going to be departing from the beautifully rendered Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts. Kilo Mike Victor Yankee. This is a payware airport brought to you by Burning Blue Designs and features exquisite detail. It hasn't made its way to the marketplace yet, but it's available directly from the developer, link in the notes below. This quaint New England island is a popular destination for US presidents, and Air Force One is no stranger to the runways here. We're going to be heading about 35 nautical miles northeast to Provincetown Municipal. We'll be flying IFR but not using the GPS. We'll be tracking a VOR before turning for a visual landing, runway 25. We'll also be turning up the dial on the weather just to make it a little bit more challenging. The appeal of the Twin Otter is its versatility. It can carry cargo, passengers, and it can take off and land in very small spaces. The livery I've chosen today, well, not really appropriate for this part of the world. It's freeware available on flightsim.to and I just think it's lovely. So I thought I'd just take the opportunity to show it off here. The one area where the Twin Otter is not found lacking is in the external views. Lots of attention to detail and nicely crafted animations. Okay, let's make preparations to get away. Lock off. I'm just going to hide the yoke so I can get at the switches that open and close the cargo pods. The Twin Otter has 2, one forward and one aft. And now let's close the co-pilot and pilot's doors. That's done. All that remains is for us to close the doors at the back. As you can see, we're in the passenger variant of the Twin Otter today, but we are sporting the slightly larger Tundra tyres. Need to get some oil on that door. Doors are all closed. Let's move on and get this started. First of all, let's put the power on. And now it's time to get some lights on. And we're going to put on our nav or position and beacon or anti-collision lights. I'll also put on the flight compartment lights. Not going to worry about the passenger lights at the moment. Now both left and right ignition switches on. And now DC switch on to power up the aircraft and we should have life, which we do. Our aircraft is alive. Let's put on our fuel boosters aft and fore. We'll put them both on now. We're about ready to start our engines, but first of all let's check that the parking brake is on. Being a turboprop aircraft, she can have a tendency to creep forward. Let's open up our fuel valves, both of our condition levers fully forward. That's done. Now both of our prop levers both out of feather and then we can push them both forward. We're ready for start and we're going to start off with the right engine. I like that warble sound as the engines spool up. We have a good start on our right engine, so we'll put the generator to reset and it will switch itself back to on. We're done with the right engine for now. Time to start the left engine. We have a successful start on the left engine, so now time to put the generator for the left engine on. That's done. We can get both of our left and right bleed airs on, and I'm going to set them both to auto. It's not too cold, so I'm just going to set the de-icer to auto for now. A quick check on our PNTs, make sure everything's starting to move up into the green, which it is. I've checked the ATIS, barometer is 29.92, so standard, and departure is runway 24. Just quickly going to pull up Navigraph so we can look at some more detail. This is a payware add-on, a monthly or annual subscription. And here you can see our flight. We're departing, heading north-northeast, directly to the Marconi VOR 114.7 and then to Provincetown Municipal. ATC have told us runway 24. Navigraph shows us where we're positioned, so we're going to taxi to the right. It's a long runway, I won't need all of that. I've got the Garmin GNSs on board, and I'm just going to set both of the VORs to 114.70, Marconi North. That's now done. And while we're here, we will set our transponder code. I'm not using the inbuilt ATC today, so I'll just say I've been given a transponder code of 3344, and I'll set it to altitude reporting now. Provincetown has an NDB 389, so we'll just quickly set that. Although we shouldn't really need that today, it's a visual approach. I have my cockpit interactions set to legacy as opposed to lock, as I find it easier to interface and adjust these instruments. That's my NDB and VOR's now set, and I'll be heading roughly on a heading of 50 degrees, so I'll just change that. Just to mix it up a little bit, we'll be using this VOR gauge today. That's close enough for now, and I'm also going to set my heading to about the same 50 degrees, and I can adjust that once in flight. In this flight we're going to manually track the VOR and adjust our heading as necessary. Almost ready to go now. Just do a quick check on our trims, adjust our rudder trim. We need a little bit of right rudder to counter the torque of the engine. It does tend to pull the aircraft to the left, and there's a handy mark, and I like a little bit of nose down. Back to our overhead panel, pitot heat on, and we'll also put our taxi light on, as we'll be taxiing very shortly. We're now ready for taxi. Just check the PNTs, all in the green. That's all looking okay at the moment. Handbrake off. This is going to be a tight squeeze. Have you noticed most of the ground staff have little regard for their own safety? I've just nudged the throttle forward to get moving and then straight back to idle. She needs no encouragement to taxi, and you often have to dab the brakes. Flaps now one notch down to 10% for takeoff. I'm sure that sound is the flap sound. Not sure why it's sounding again unless it's something else. If it is the flap sound, well, it's a real shame, because the sounds so far have been fine. They seem to have addressed all issues, but I think there's still a major problem with the flap sounds. We're just going to hold short before entering the runway and do our final preparations. ATC has given us clearance for takeoff, so landing lights on. We could perhaps leave our taxi lights on, but we'll turn them off for this departure. And as we're cleared to enter the runway, well, time to put our strobe lights on as well. And lastly, to activate auto feather. Let's now go ahead and line up. Throttle slightly forward to get a bit of movement, and then back to idle. Well, I must say, overall I've been quite impressed with the changes and mods they've made to the sound and the sound transitions. That flap sound just lets it down. Little bit of a crosswind today, but shouldn't be too much to worry about. Okay, we're ready to go. Just bring it to a stop and we'll have a quick check on our PNTs. Just make sure that they're all okay. Nothing to alarm us there. Holding her on the brakes, push the throttle forward 50%, give a little bit of time for the engines to spool up, and Now releasing the brakes and we start to move forward. Because the Twin Otter's a turboprop, you move the throttles forward slowly but surely. Don't slam them forward, you could damage the engines. Props fully forward. Not too heavily loaded up today, so anything around 75 knots and we'll rotate. We're up, a little bit of crosswind, just feeding in a little bit of left rudder to hold me aligned with the runway. Airspeed approaching 100, it's safe. Pulling my nose up, I'm looking for about 1,200 feet per minute climb. Minimum climb speed is about 85 knots. Flap away. Prop levers back to about 80%. Now a left-hand turn to our 50-degree heading. No need to worry about gear as the Twin Otter's got fixed landing gear, of course. We'll hand fly this initially to about 2,000 feet, maybe a little bit more, and get ourselves on course before switching to autopilot. And as mentioned earlier, we'll be mainly using the heading to keep us on course for VOR Makoni North, which should be around 50 degrees or so. We don't need the auto feather setting now, so that's switched off. And we're already passing 1,200 feet. The Twin Otter can climb very quickly indeed, especially when not heavily laden. I've got one eye on our VOR 2 gauge. We're coming round just about to our 50-degree heading now, and the direction marker is more or less dead center, so we're pretty much on track at this point. Coming out of the turn now, left that a little bit late, just correcting. What I'm aiming to do is keep the VOR needle centrally located and adjust my heading as I need to. We're over 3,000 feet, so now autopilot on and also heading on. You can, if you want to, get the autopilot to track the heading to the VOR station directly. Today we'll do it manually, now adjusting my vertical speed to 1,200 feet climb. Shortly after takeoff I pulled my prop levers back to about 75%. My throttle levers are around about 85% at the moment. If we take a look at our engine gauges, for my torque, which is adjusted by throttle, I'm looking at 45 to 50 psi. And for the props it's RPM, and for the climb I'm keeping it in and around the 90% mark. Our VOR needle is now slightly off center, so just adjusting to find center. That looks about 45 degrees. If I fly that heading, it's going to take me directly to the VOR, so I now need to adjust my heading. So now to turn the heading dial to roughly 45 degrees, the aircraft will turn because it's on autopilot, and I will continue to track the VOR. I feel I'm yawing a little bit, so back to the trim, and I'll just take the right rudder trim back to neutral. Now reached our cruise altitude of 8,000 feet. For our throttle or torque setting I'm looking for 40. My props are pretty much okay where they are, just short of the 90%. If you're wondering what these little dials are, they are to help you set your prop sync between your left and your right engine. You make adjustments by moving your prop levers. Just a quick check on Navigraph to see if I'm still on course, which I am. I'm a little to the right. However, on this heading my needle is centered on my VOR gauge, so I will converge back onto the route. From the Makoni VOR we can take a heading of 340 or 350, then a heading of about 247 for a final visual approach. It's just after 4:30 in the afternoon, and we've got about 30 to 45 minutes before sunset. Only a few nautical miles to go till KMVY, so time to start our descent. I'm going to dial in 3,000 feet and then plan a descent at about 1,500 feet per minute. You'll find the Twin Otter can react very quickly to power changes, and it can get down very quickly when you want it to. So I've now set my altitude to 3,000 feet, and now I'm going to adjust it for vertical speed minus 1,500 feet. I'll have to keep an eye on the speed and pull back on the throttle as necessary just to maintain around about 120 knots for the descent, maybe a little more. I'm not deploying flaps, I don't want to lose airspeed. I got plenty of time to get down to the required altitude. Note the NDB has been picked up and is now pointing towards the airport, but as mentioned earlier, we won't be using the NDB today. Now coming up on 4,000 feet, my pressure setting has remained at 29.92 for Provincetown Municipal. I'm not going to pay too much attention to the movement of the VOR needle at this point, as you get closer to the VOR station, so the more sensitive it becomes. I'm currently tracking around about 35 degrees heading, and I'm just going to hold that. I'll know when I'm directly over the VOR gauge, as it will lose signal momentarily. There we go. And now the arrow is pointing down, indicating that the bearing is from and not to. Now turning on a heading of about 350 degrees, I'll be maintaining 3,000 feet until final approach. Just starting to bleed off some speed now, 120 knots. The sun is starting to dip towards the horizon now. It's a lovely time of day to fly in Microsoft Flight Simulator. The graphics, well, they're just amazing. Well, that's the airport there at my 10 o'clock. I've been too busy staring at the skyline than worrying about where the airport is. Autopilot off, and now hand fly this down. I've slightly overshot the turn, but no problem, I got plenty of distance and altitude to correct. Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. Trays in the upright position. I'm sorry, you should have gone before we left. Writing your name on body parts is purely optional. .110 knots, flaps down 10. Flaps down second notch, 20 degrees. .100 knots, flaps down 30 degrees. And now flaps to full. Speed 80 knots, Pappy Light's saying I'm a little high, but I do need to clear these trees. Watching my airspeed, allowing it to bleed off very slowly. I want to be over the threshold at something in the region of about 75 knots. Plenty of runway here for the Twin Otter. Pulling the throttle back to idle. Now to flare, speed 70 knots. We're down, a little bit off center, but we're down nonetheless. Let's give reverse thrust a go. That sound transition is a lot better than what it was before, but perhaps could still do with a little bit of work. Coming off the runway, retract flaps. Taxi lights on and landing lights off. Let me finish off with my final views and comments on Aerosoft's Twin Otter. Following what can only be described as a disappointing release, the minor updates that have been released have addressed many of the main issues, although some still remain. This aircraft is a pleasure to fly. I'll probably fly it fairly regularly and it will have a place in my hangar, no doubt. But Aerosoft themselves set the standard of excellence with the release of the CRJ. And that's the standard that we expect. And the Twin Otter, well, it's not there yet. I hope you found this useful and informative, and thank you very much for joining me. Take care, look after yourselves, I'll see you again soon, and bye for now.